Welcome to Terrible Lizards, a podcast about dinosaurs with Dr. David Hone and Izzy Lawrence. On this month's episode, we're heading due south to find out what the dinosaurs doing there. Hello everybody and welcome to episode 4 of the year is 2024. The time is whatever time you're listening to this. I hope you're sitting comfortably because we have from Queen Mary University is Dr. David Hone, dinosaur expert man, and all the way over here in Reading with no formal title at all. It's Izzy Lawrence. Nice to see you.
Muzz?
Yeah, although you can...
Muzzy Lawrence.
You can, on any website, just put whatever title you... I've been Reverend before, when I've had packages delivered.
Yeah, I remember applying for a job at, I think it was Leeds University, and they had a list that had... It was clearly for everything, and it had, like, Lord, Lady, Marquis, Admiral...
Nice.
Dame, Sir, the Right Reverend, His Grace, and he's like, just went on forever with every possible title.
Well... We have another... Is it a professor we've got on the show today?
No, it's not, I believe, because of the specificity that universities can give out the professor title, but museums cannot.
Okay, so I tell you what, we've got a guest, and I'll tell you what...
If I've got it wrong, sorry.
Yeah, that's true.
But I don't think he's professor. I think he's doctor.
I mean, if you work at Hogwarts, you just get to be a professor automatically. So I just,
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a horribly flawed system. None of them have a PhD, let alone have done anything else. It's awful.
It's terrible. There doesn't seem to be a university in the wizarding world, but never mind, because we don't need that sort of magic. We've got a different sort of magic, which is dinosaurs on the South Pole. Well, Antarctica.
I mean, it's near enough. So as has been the theme of this series, the 200th anniversary of Dinosaurs conference at the Natural History Museum, I got to catch up with loads of friends and colleagues who I haven't seen for years. One of whom is Dr. Matt Lamanna, who may or may not be professor, but I don't think he is Matt Lamanna.
He should be. Yeah,
I know. Who's at the Carnegie Museum. And Matt really specialises in Gondwanan dinosaurs, so that's things from the southern continent as was, but in particular, Antarctic stuff. And this is one of those things where I think many people who know a little bit about dinosaurs are probably aware that there are dinosaurs from the continent of Antarctica, not just from the south. So there's things like Antarctosaurus, but that's southern dinosaur. It's from Argentina. It's not from the Antarctic. But there is stuff from continental Antarctica.
I mean, people have heard
it's really, really hard to dig stuff up there. Matt's done most of it, so he's a fantastic person to speak to about a subject about which I know basically nothing beyond there were dinosaurs there.
And there are also extant dinosaurs, because there are penguins. But we will,
instead
of having me starting to make jokes about chocolate biscuits, we should go straight to the interview.
So welcome, Matt, who, as I said, on this series, we're trying to bring people in who can do all the things that I can't do, but can talk about the stuff that I can't really talk about. And I don't really talk or know that much about the southern continent and the southern dinosaurs in general. And that's Matt's speciality. And I really don't know anything from Antarctica, and that's really his speciality. So that's really why I wanted to get him in. But to be honest, I wanted to start a little bit with Matt, your current job, because you're at the Carnegie, and if you're going to be a dinosaur guy and work somewhere, there are worse museums to be based in.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I have been here. I'm on year 20, actually, of being the dinosaur curator at the Carnegie Museum.
Wow.
And I am thankful every day. The timing of this is really great. The timing of you saying that, Dave, is really great because we just hired a new collection manager, Sarah Davis, and I was showing her around the museum for the first time like 10 minutes ago. So it was just amazing to watch another vertebrate paleontology nerd like go through our museum, and she was literally bouncing with excitement. So it just was, it's very, it's not lost on me how privileged I am to work here, and get to be, partly responsible for such an important collection of dinosaurs and other fossil animals.
I mean, that was absolutely my experience when I was there. And I mean, just to be very clear to the audience, in case you don't know, so the Diplodocus, like the one everyone knows and is cast and is every museum and is in Berlin and is in London and is in Milan, you have the original.
We do.
And that's next to the Apatosaurus.
Uh-huh.
And then in the same room is the holotype of Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Yes, it's a very important piece of real estate in terms of dinosaurs on our planet. Yeah, we have not one but three type specimens, famous type specimens of dinosaurs in our gallery, and a type specimen is the one upon which the species is based. So I tell people we have the original Diplodocus, and then sometimes I'm like, but wait, there's more. We have the original Tyrannosaurus Rex as well. So like I said, just an incredible privilege to get to work here. It's still, I still, even after 20 years, it's still, in some ways hard to believe.
Yes. I'm jealous.
yeah, it's good. I mean, let's be blunt. I want that job. And probably the only person who's not after that job is you, because you've already got it. So...
And you look annoyingly healthy, so
yeah.
I hide it well. I did go to the gym this morning.
That's more than I managed.
So tell us a little bit, because Dave has explained to me that we'll be talking very much about dinosaurs he's not aware of, or he's aware of them, but he doesn't know a lot about them because they're cold. This is how I describe. So why you basically look at the south, so the southern hemisphere. That's your speciality.
It is, yeah, and the reason for that is, and I'll try to keep this short, but as Dave definitely knows, when dinosaurs first evolved, all the world's continents were smashed into one big giant continent called Pangaea. The first dinosaurs date to give or take 230 million years ago or so. Pangaea started to break up in a major way beginning about 150 million years ago, so end of the Jurassic period. And the first kind of major event in the breakup of Pangaea was it split into a northern supercontinent and a southern supercontinent. And the way that paleontology has unfolded historically, it started, the first dinosaur was a British dinosaur, Megalosaurus. The second dinosaur was Iguanodon, also a British dinosaur. The paleontology got its start in Western Europe, or dinosaur paleontology got its start in Western Europe, spread to Western North America. Then there were expeditions to Asia. Meanwhile, the southern hemisphere was not getting as much attention, as the northern. And the cool thing about the fact that Pangaea broke into a northern half and a southern half is that if you go to the end of the age of dinosaurs, if you look in rocks from the, say the last half of the Cretaceous period, the third and final period of the age of dinosaurs, by that time, the northern and southern continents had been separate for tens of millions of years, which means that different animals had evolved in different places. And so that, coupled with the fact that exploration in the southern hemisphere hasn't been done to the same degree as it has in the northern, means that there's a lot of really interesting things out there left to find. And so when I was actually dating all the way back to when I was before a teenager, I remember the discovery of a dinosaur called Carnotaurus by an Argentine paleontologist named Jose Bonaparte. I read about this in a magazine in 1987 when I was a kid. And here was, little kid me thinks they know everything there is to know about dinosaurs. Here staring back at me is this dinosaur that looks like a T-Rex with horns on its head, a smashed-in bulldog-like face, and arms that make T-Rexes look like say, Arnold Schwarzenegger's or something. And so, so it really opened my eyes to these entire kind of lost worlds of dinosaurs that we paleontologists didn't know very much about. And I would be exaggerating to say, like, right then and there, I decided I was going to work on Southern Hemisphere dinosaurs, but the inspiration goes all the way back to then. And, thankfully, thanks to the fact that I have really, really incredible colleagues in places like Argentina, Egypt, Australia, even working with me in Antarctica, we've been able to make some discoveries that I think have, helped to kind of flesh out the Southern Hemisphere Cretaceous dinosaur record a little bit.
So where is it that you've been exploring? You've actually tried to do a dig in Antarctica? Because yes, I don't know about you, but penguins are vicious.
I will butt in here and say, having worked in a number of zoos for a number of years, the worst injuries I've ever had was being bitten by the penguins.
Well, happily, maybe we've always assumed this was for our protection, but we're not allowed to go very near the Antarctic wildlife when we work there. We always assumed it was for their protection, but maybe it's for ours. So, Izzy, to answer your question, I've worked in Antarctica 3 times, so I've been on 3 different Antarctic paleontology expeditions. The first two, I was kind of a guest of the recently retired paleontologist Ross McPhee from the American Museum of Natural History. And then in 2012, we got a grant. Ross kind of gave me the project, so to speak, and we got a grant from the U.S. National Science Foundation to do a third season in 2016, and I was the leader of that one. So I've been down there 3 times. The first time was not very successful, but the second 2 were I would say, incredibly successful. And in all 3, we definitely encountered lots and lots of wildlife, including penguins. One of my colleagues, Karen Clayson, has this video of herself from the 2016 season with a chinstrap penguin running across a peninsula that called the Naze Peninsula. So you can see this penguin start running on the other side of the peninsula towards our group. And you just hear on the video, Karen's watching the penguin on the video, and you just hear like nothing, nothing, nothing. And then Karen go, "This is the greatest day of my life." And the penguin go, right at the perfect time. So yeah, I have never had a penguin-induced injury, I will say, but I also do try to keep my distance from them. And yeah, we've had like I said, several productive paleontological expeditions to Antarctica, and I think I've mentioned too, I've worked a lot in Patagonia, Egypt, and Australia as well.
I was going to say, I thought you'd been down to Australia because
Yes.
you hadn't mentioned that, but yeah, I was pretty sure you'd been on some digs down there.
Yeah,
as well.
yeah, those are led by my collaborator Steve Salisbury at the University of Queensland, and so that's another one where I'm kind of a guest, just like a lucky guy that gets to come along and help find dinosaurs, look at kangaroos, and drink beer. It's pretty great.
Yeah, I was going to say, it must be awful being invited down to Australia to go on a dig.
I remember when I was telling Steve, I just said to Steve before the first expedition that I was on, I just said something like, I'll be happy if I'm just digging up a dinosaur with kangaroos bouncing by. And he just kind of looks at me and goes, "We can make that happen."
Yeah, I don't think that's a particular challenge if you're in the right place.
Yeah, and the strange thing was, to an American or something, for some reason, I thought kangaroos were fairly uncommon. They are absolutely not uncommon. No delusions anymore. They're absolutely not uncommon.
No one ever posts photos of them.
Yeah, here in America, we have white-tailed deer in the eastern half of America are incredibly common, and they're basically like that.
Massachusetts has turkeys.
Pittsburgh has turkeys too. Not to get too sidetracked, but this city is the most probably wildlife-friendly city I've ever lived in. We've here at the museum, at the Carnegie Museum, we have deer in our parking lot. I would say most nights that I leave, there's a park called Shenley Park that I run in sometimes, and I almost always see turkeys or deer there. So it's a very very wildlife friendly place here in Pittsburgh.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah.
So where do we begin?
I probably could spend the whole time talking about Antarctica, so let's do that. So I've been there 3 times so far. We look at rocks in a depositional basin, so a geographic area called the James Ross Basin. The rocks there date to the end of the age of dinosaurs and the beginning of the age of mammals. So you're talking probably the oldest fossil-bearing rocks are probably around maybe 90-ish million, or at least the oldest Cretaceous fossil-bearing rocks are around 90 million years old. There's a not totally continuous, but pretty continuous geologic section, like set of strata, set of rock layers that goes all the way up to maybe, give or take 30, 35 million years ago, something like that.
Oh, that recent?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't realize.
There's definitely, I want to say the youngest stuff is Oligocene. It's definitely at least Eocene. I tend to work on the Cretaceous side of the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary. So, shocker, obviously. I'm much more familiar with the stratigraphy on that side. So it's this near continuous sequence of rocks that spans the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary. So the time 66 million years ago when a giant asteroid fell out of the sky and caused all kinds of environmental havoc. And led to the extinction of non-avian dinosaurs. So all dinosaurs except birds. We look primarily on the Cretaceous side of things, on islands, primarily Vega Island, but also James Ross Island, Seymour Island, and Snow Hill Island as well. And we've even been to a really remote island called Robertson Island that has some late Cretaceous sediments too.
So for people who don't know, Antarctica is mostly a blob, but then there's like a hook bit peninsula that comes out, and you're on that bit.
The islands we work on, James Ross, Vega, Snow Hill, Seymour, and others, they're all on the Antarctic Peninsula. And so the Antarctic Peninsula is this kind of prong that comes up from Antarctica towards South America. I have some colleagues that work about 500 miles from the South Pole, so really close, comparatively speaking, really close to the South Pole. We jokingly call my project Antarctica Light because we're comparatively speaking like subtropical compared to those guys. But the reason we go to the place we go is it's the only place in Antarctica where you can find, that anyone's found so far at least, where you can find late Cretaceous age fossils. So this area of the Antarctic Peninsula is the only one that gives us a window into what Antarctica was like at the end of the age of dinosaurs. And so that's the reason we go there. You're very limited when you're looking for fossils in Antarctica, because to find the fossils, you got to find the rocks they're in. And as you guys both know, a lot of Antarctica is covered in ice and snow year round. In fact, more than 99% of the land area of Antarctica is covered in ice and snow year round. And so you're limited to that less than 1%. If you're going to look at fossils with any age, you're limited to that less than 1% that isn't covered by ice and snow year round. And the only place that anyone has ever found so far that has late Cretaceous age fossils, so fossils from the end of the age of dinosaurs in Antarctica, is the James Ross Basin of the Antarctic Peninsula. That is our target field area. That's where we go. It's a little bit frustrating for a dinosaur paleontologist like myself, because I'm used to working in what we call continental systems. So rock systems that were deposited in places like lakes and rivers and streams, like adjacent to land, in some cases circumscribed by land. Almost all dinosaurs that we know of were very predominantly land-living animals, so you tend to find their remains in rocks like this. In the James Ross Basin, almost all the rocks are marine rocks. So in other words, they were deposited in the bottoms of often shallow, but oceans. And so whenever you find fossils of a land-living organism, a tree or a dinosaur, or when we find fossils of land-living animals in the James Ross Basin, in these marine rocks, they're almost always, or maybe always, these situations where the animal has died on land, floated out to sea, sunk to the bottom, and been buried by marine sediments. And you can probably imagine that in those situations, there's a lot of detrimental things that can happen to the carcass in between death and fossilization. So you've got, the thing croaks on land, gets washed out, maybe it gets scavenged on land or something. Then what's left gets washed out to sea, and then sharks and mosasaurs come and chomp at it. And then it finally sinks down into the ocean floor, and marine invertebrates start hacking away at it too. So the long and the short of it is, when we find fossils of land-living animals, such as non-avian dinosaurs in the James Ross Basin in Antarctica, they're often really, really, really fragmentary. They're extremely rare and usually very incomplete. And so for a dinosaur specialist like me, like somebody who's kind of a dinosaur nerd through and through, it's a little bit frustrating to me to be the leader of this Antarctic Peninsula Paleontology project and have next to nothing to work on a lot of the time. So our fossil fish person loves it. Our marine reptile person just is in hog heaven, because it's just plesiosaurs all over the place. Plesiosaurs are these long-necked, flippered marine reptiles. They've historically been described as picture the quote-unquote Loch Ness monster, or they've often been likened to threading a snake through the body of a sea turtle, something like that, or a shellless sea turtle. But yeah, so the short way to say that is that marine animals are very common in the rocks of the James Ross Basin, especially invertebrates like ammonites, these sort of squid-like creatures that lived in shells, clams, this sort of triangular clam called pinna, marine vertebrates like plesiosaurs and fishes, but continental animals, land-living animals like dinosaurs and other land-living creatures are extraordinarily uncommon. And so it becomes, for somebody who's interested in land animals from the end of the age of dinosaurs, it's a very frustrating place to work. That being said, we keep trying, and we have without revealing too much, made some significant discoveries over the years, some of which have been published and some of which are the ones I can't talk about, which haven't yet.
The stuff you have, I mean, you name 2-3 species, or am I even underestimating that?
I don't think I've ever named a dinosaur species from Antarctica, but I would say the primary dinosaur that I'm working on right now was found actually not by me, but it was found by my collaborator Judd Case in 2003 from a place called the Naze on James Ross Island, and it's a predatory dinosaur that dates to about 70 million years ago. Judd and his student Ricardo Ely gave it the name Imperobator in 2019, and it's what's called a paravian. so a paravian is the type of, and Dave knows these animals really well. This is a type of theropod, type of predatory dinosaur that's really closely related to birds, but not quite a bird itself, if that makes sense. So think like things like Velociraptor, Troodon, think very, very bird-like predatory dinosaurs. An Imperobator is some kind of one of those. I actually think that Imperobator is a type of paravian called an Unenlahine, and an Unenlahine is a type of dromaeosaurid, so think like a cousin of Velociraptor, or many people think they're a type of dromaeosaurid, not everybody, but many. A bird-like predatory dinosaur with kind of a long snout, small teeth, almost certainly covered in feathers. In fact, being from Antarctica, maybe extra feathered compared to some of the others, and quite a large animal too, as these guys go. So the animal, unfortunately, is not very complete. We have Ricardo and Judd described the feet, and we have a little bit of the tail and a little bit of the skull now too. We've actually gone back to the site and found more material there of this animal. Based on that new material and kind of a restudy of what we already had, we think it isn't this type of animal called an Unenlahine. If any of the audience has ever heard of a dinosaur called Austroraptor, this is a type of southern hemisphere Patagonian Unenlahine. We actually think Imperobator may have been pretty similar to that. So quite large as these things go, maybe something like 4 to 5 meters long.
That's nose to tail.
Nose to tail. Yep, nose to tail. Yeah. And, presumably, again, covered in feathers, long jaws filled with sharp teeth. There's been some speculation this group may have been maybe a little bit more inclined to eat fish and other aquatic prey than some of the other members of the group. And that may be the case here as well. But more to come with Imperobator, but that's where our heads are at now, thinking about what it is. I will say that, like other Antarctic non-avian dinosaur finds, it's extremely fragmentary. It's very difficult to interpret, but we think we've squeezed some new information out of the pieces that we've got.
I mean, at least some people will be familiar with it because it's in Prehistoric Planet Series 2. So
Yep. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, so for those that have seen the second season of Prehistoric Planet, it's in one of the episodes.
Can't remember which one.
Yeah, no. I can't remember. I think it's like the first or second. It's pretty early in the series. People will recognize it because I think it's the only scene set in Antarctica, but it's 3 of these animals in Imperobator chase a dinosaur called Morosaurus across an ice floe in the movie. And I was joking with Darren Naish, who's the lead science advisor for Prehistoric Planet, that if he had just called me up, I would have told him that they should have CG'd it in a different way to make it, because they made it basically look like a fluffy velociraptor. And Unenlahines have somewhat different proportions, especially in the skulls and things like that. So I believe Imperobator to be probably a giant Unenlahine. And that's super cool because Unenlahines are otherwise known from Patagonia, Brazil, and probably Madagascar.
Yeah, so they're all down south.
Exactly.
So
it's another one of these groups that has what we call a Gondwanan distribution, a southern hemisphere distribution, after the name of the southern supercontinent of Gondwana.
So when did Gondwana separate from the rest of Pangaea? When was that exactly?
So that was about 150 million years ago. So in the Upper Jurassic was the breakup of the northern and southern supercontinents. So the northern supercontinent we call Laurasia, and the southern supercontinent we call Gondwana. And then during the Cretaceous, the third and final period of the age of dinosaurs, Gondwana itself started to break up. And so by the end, Africa was probably off by itself, maybe in more close proximity to Europe than anywhere else. Madagascar and India broke away from the rest of Gondwana probably circa 150 million years ago, so really early. India and Madagascar broke up at about 85 to 90 million years ago. This is a kind of a fun side note, but some of the audience might not know that India is actually a chunk of Gondwana. It's a chunk of the southern hemisphere that migrated north during the age of mammals, slammed into Asia, and, voila, here are the Himalayas as a result. So Africa probably off by itself, India, Madagascar off by itself. But South Gondwana, the southernmost part of Gondwana, so South America, southern South America, Antarctica, and Australia, probably were either still connected at the end of the age of dinosaurs or at least in really close proximity. And that's borne out by the types of fossils that we find in both places. So the very hard-won dinosaur fauna of the James Ross Basin, which is as difficult as I told you it is to find dinosaurs, there's actually members of 5 different major dinosaur groups that have been found from the James Ross Basin so far. For all of those that we have reasonably complete material, they all seem to match counterparts in southern Patagonia really, really well. And so we actually think the dinosaur fauna is telling us something about the connectivity of southernmost South America and the Antarctic Peninsula at the end of the age of dinosaurs. In other words, we find more or less the same things on either side, and so we think that there still was some continuity between those land masses, or at least a way for animals to go back and forth.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so the question I have at this point, we're talking about Antarctica, and as you mentioned, prehistoric planet, the scene has them running through the snow and across ice, and Antarctica wasn't quite that far south, but what was it like? Because...
Fantastic question. So geographically, it was not that different latitudinally than it is now. It really was not in a really very different position than today. So it still would have been, centered over the South Pole, more or less, like very, very polar in environment. But for a variety of reasons, it certainly wasn't as cold as it is today. In fact, it may have been at times in the Cretaceous either tropical to subtropical. I can't remember which island this is from, but there's a flora, like a fossil flora from, it might even be like somebody did like ocean drilling and drilled through like an ancient sediment layer that had fossil pollen in it or something like that. But there's a paper from, I want to say about 5 years ago, that argues that around 90 million years ago, at what we call the Cretaceous thermal maximum, basically the hottest time of the age of dinosaurs about 90 million years ago, this part of Antarctica may well have been home to like effectively a tropical rainforest based on the pollen that's found there. So in the Cretaceous, I think what I can say with certainty is that during the Cretaceous, at least many intervals of the Cretaceous, Antarctica was much warmer, much more lush than it is today. That's almost by default, because when you're on these islands, there's really no vegetation, or almost no vegetation. But when these dinosaurs were living, we actually have, even from the rocks that yield the dinosaurs, we have excellent fossil floras, and those are about to get even better based on some really recent expeditions. I will tell you, one of the coolest examples, I guess pun intended, one of the coolest examples of climate change in deep time, like large-scale climate change in deep time, is sitting on the side of an ice-covered mountainside in Antarctica, breaking open rocks and seeing leaves fall out that look like they could have come from a western Pennsylvania forest. It was a very, very different place during the Cretaceous, a place that had extensive vegetation, lots of different kinds of trees and shrubs and herbs and things like this, conifers as well. And obviously, once you've got that sort of foundation of that ecosystem, you can support big plant-eating animals such as dinosaurs, and then in turn support meat eaters such as Imperobiter. So the long and the short of it is, it was generally much warmer than it is today. It still would have experienced long periods of darkness because latitudinally latitudinally is in a similar place.
Yeah. So that's going to make it cold at least.
Yes,
because if you just got no sun for 3 months.
Exactly.
And you're not going to be able to have lush, big-leafed plants that don't have an adaptation to wither and
right,
hibernate,
exactly. And it is paradoxical that way, because there is, like I said, a really diverse flora. I don't think any of them are particularly large-leaved, at least as we know, but there definitely were herbaceous plants, like definitely flowering plants with leaves that we would recognize. There really is no definitive modern analog to this environment, because you've got a relatively warm, I would say, temperate environment, at least when these dinosaurs are living. Roughly, most of the dinosaurs we find there are give or take about 72 million years old. So almost at the end of the age of dinosaurs, which ended 6 million years later, 66 million years ago. These 72-ish million year old dinosaurs would definitely have been living in, based on the floras, like a temperate, maybe cool temperate, but temperate environment, but one that also experienced lengthy periods of continuous darkness. And so it's like, the best I can do is, I don't know if the audience is predominantly European or predominantly, wherever, but the place here in North America that I kind of compare it to is the Pacific Northwest, like Seattle. Imagine Seattle, that region, like Vancouver, that area with, picture the climate of
darkness,
that, but with extensive darkness. Exactly. Yeah. And so it really doesn't have it doesn't have any exact modern analog, which makes it really puzzling to figure out. But what we do know is that it was home to a diversity of plants, a very vast diversity of plants, and also quite a significant number of big land-living animals, dinosaurs.
I tried to work out, like, maybe they migrated during the winter, or maybe they just hunkered down, or...
It's a very long way to migrate, that's the thing.
Yeah, out of that zone.
Yeah, people have argued that both ways. Were they resident year-round? Did they move back and forth? There have been some, I think, advances in the ways that we study the way that dinosaurs moved around. Like, I'm thinking in particular, Dave will be familiar with these, like, isotopic studies, like, based on, kind of...
Just about to ask, has anyone done isotopes on the teeth
rings?
Yeah,
nobody has really done that, as far as I can remember, with Antarctic dinosaurs to try to test whether they were resident or not. But it might be the kind of thing that we explore in the future and, look into that and see if we can draw any conclusions that way.
If you're going to check their teeth to see whether, because obviously the teeth have those isotopes in them, meaning you can tell which rocks they're drinking water from.
Exactly.
That's what we're talking about here. But doesn't that mean you're going to need to, like, properly drill down through the ice and everything else to get the isotope measurements as well? I'm just thinking the practicalities of doing that at the South Pole.
It depends what you're doing. So I think the first person who really did this stuff was a guy called Thomas Tutken in Germany. But what he was doing was with sauropod teeth, drilling through them, and they have these growth bands. And what he basically showed is it didn't really matter what the rocks they were in. The bands alternated. And it's like, if they go A, B, A, B, A, B, A and B must be different places. And if they keep going from one to the other, it would be very odd if they weren't doing that between the same places every 6 months. And that looks like an annual migration cycle. So you don't necessarily need local signatures to compare.
Yeah, and thank you guys for bailing me out there. But basically, I was thinking of looking at the teeth themselves, not the, climate scientists drill ice cores to look at, gas compositions and things like that in the Quaternary in the, relatively recent past. We would not be doing that. We would have to look at the teeth of the dinosaurs themselves. But we, unfortunately, there's just not that many dinosaur teeth from Antarctica at the end of the age of dinosaurs, at least so far. Yeah, the question of whether they were migratory or resident, or some were migratory, others were resident, is really a pretty open question. And I think it's a very interesting one, given the strangeness of the environment. Hopefully something we'll be able to get at some point.
Have you found any large herbivores in Antarctica?
Yes, although maybe not coincidentally, they're generally not as big as what we see in lower latitudes. So the most common, and I say this in a very relative sense because dinosaur fossils are extraordinarily rare in the James Ross Basin, but the most common types of what we call non-avian dinosaurs, so non-bird dinosaurs, and we should talk about the birds at some point too. The most common types of non-avian dinosaurs are what we call either early diverging ornithopods, so basal primitive ornithopods. Sometimes people they lump them within this group called the Lasmeria. And these are a type of dinosaur that probably most people aren't going to be familiar with, so I'll try to describe them. Imagine, if anybody can remember what like a Hypsilophodon looks like, or a Dryosaurus, or some of these slightly better known animals that are generally comparable.
Small, skinny iguanodon?
Yeah, like a skinny iguanodon would be a way to... Yeah, skinny iguanodon is a great way to describe it. A smaller, skinny iguanodon.
With no happy thumbs up.
As far as we know, no thumb spike. But yeah, so small to medium size, so you're talking maybe 2 to 5 meter long. Probably most of them were bipedal, but a few of them may have been able to go on all fours from time to time. They'd be distant cousins of things like iguanodon, might have had a generally similar lifestyle. So presumably, probably moving around in herds.
They probably went through herbs.
Yeah, they probably, as they moving in herds, eating herbs, potentially moving in herds, we don't know for sure. But they, again, would have been kind of a smallish head, sort of a long neck as these dinosaurs go. Not sauropod long, but pretty long, pretty good sized body, much bigger hind limbs than forelimbs, and a long tail. And so they're kind of a nondescript looking plant-eating dinosaur. And again, if anybody remembers Prehistoric Planet, the scene where the Imperabators chase this dinosaur across an ice floe, the dinosaur Morosaurus is one of these either early diverging ornithopods or potentially elasmerians. I think I'm going to call them elasmerians because it's easier to say than early diverging ornithopods.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the most common, and again, relatively speaking, common type of dinosaur in the Antarctic Cretaceous that we've found so far are these elasmerians. Again, small to medium-sized plant-eating dinosaurs dinosaurs. And these are represented at present, and I think this might change in the future, but these are represented at present by at least 3 partial skeletons, 2 of which have been made the type specimens, the holotypes of new species. So one of them is Morosaurus, Morosaurus antarcticus. This is a dinosaur that appears in Prehistoric Planet. It's the prey of the Imperabators. It ultimately gets away.
Spoilers.
Sorry. Well, I figure people have seen it by now.
They couldn't all have got away. They couldn't all have got away.
They definitely didn't all get away.
They
definitely didn't all get away. The other one is called Trinisaura, Trinisaura santamartaensis. And so, so there was at least 2 different species of these animals down there around 72 million years ago. We find their bones maybe more commonly than any other type of Antarctic Cretaceous dinosaur. There is another type of plant-eating dinosaur, actually 2 other types of plant-eating dinosaur. Actually, 3 other types of plant-eating dinosaur. I've been correcting myself. There's an ankylosaur, so a type of armored dinosaur. This animal is called Antarctopelta, just means Antarctic shield, after the armor that it probably, bore on its body. And it's probably what's called a parankylosaur. It's a type of southern hemisphere kind of primitive ankylosaur, for lack of a better word. If anyone has heard of the weird little thing that was just described from Chile a couple of years ago called Stegoros. So this animal, Antarctopelta, is very probably a close relative of Stegoros, this strange little archaic ankylosaur that was found from Chile in rocks that are about the same age. And so yet another piece of evidence that the faunas of the 2 areas are probably pretty similar to each other. For those that don't remember Stegoros, this it looks kind of like, in some ways, sort of a garden variety ankylosaur, except it's got this crazy, it looks to me like a Christmas tree, in profile or something. But some people have likened it to a fern frond or an Aztec war implement. This crazy, thing on the end of its tail, where some ankylosaurs have a war club. This thing has this crazy, sort of pine cone looking thing.
I called it an axe.
Yeah.
Because they're quite flat. So, we've got club tails and spike tails in stegosaurs, and then in my next book I've said it's an axe tail.
Yeah. I think that's a good analogy, and it may have been used something like that. But so this animal's down there. There's also one bone that seems to be that of a sauropod dinosaur, so a long neck, long tail.
I was going to say I didn't think we had sauropods.
Yeah,
so
there's one bone that's been identified as a titanosaur caudal vertebra, so a tail bone of a type of sauropod called a titanosaur. And titanosaurs are
big.
Yeah, the subgroup of sauropods that includes the largest land animals of all time. And some of the smallest sauropods we know about as well. Cow-sized sauropods from the Cretaceous of Transylvania, of all places. So one bone that suggests the presence of a titanosaur. Oh, and one tooth and maybe a couple of other bones of a type of dinosaur called the hadrosauroid. So these are duck-billed dinosaurs. And there's the most convincing evidence of them from Antarctica is a single tooth found by, again, my colleague Judd Case and his team in this case, 1999. So we've got evidence for at least 5 major groups of dinosaurs in the James Ross Basin at the end of the Cretaceous, the end of the Age of Dinosaurs. And that's not even counting the birds. So again, fairly diverse fauna, probably way more diverse than we even know about right now. Also very diverse flora, somehow thriving under these conditions that we really don't have a good modern analog for today.
Yeah, so the next thing that springs to my mind is particularly, when you mention the ankylosaur, which are similar to Stegosaurus. Well, Stegosaurus is weird because, as you say, it's early branching. The phylogenetic analysis, so the family tree puts it as an early member of the group, but then appearing very, very late. And then you've just said, Hypsilophodontids. Well, they were obviously still around, but they're a very early group turning up late. That says relict to me. And for those who don't know, relict is with a T, relict. We talk about that as, things that are late surviving, that in most other places have been replaced or evolved into something else, or something has happened to them.
A bit like lemurs in Madagascar.
That sort of thing. Like an early lineage which in other places have gone out but have survived in this one place. That's what you're describing for the Antarctic stuff.
I
stuff
think
that's gone everywhere else but is hanging around.
In some ways, yes. I mean, I guess if I had a bet on it or something, I think that we're going to see that these parankylosaurs, these Stegoros-like ankylosaurs, are probably quite a lot more diverse and widespread in the southern hemisphere than we currently understand. Yeah. So one example of this is I know that there's another one of these parankylosaurs that's going to be named from kind of mid latitudes and not mid latitude, but central Patagonia. There's another new one of these that's coming out.
I knew there was one coming.
Yeah, but there's also a host of different ankylosaurs in the early Cretaceous of Australia that may also be connected to this group. So things like Cunborosaurus, Minmi, there's some undescribed specimens as well. I suspect that this is a big radiation with a long, mostly undiscovered history in particular in southern and eastern Gondwana that we just haven't really seen yet. I will say that if there is a relictual component to the Antarctic Cretaceous fauna, which is, I think, a good and defensible idea, Dave, but that there's also definitely some influence with other land masses too. Like, so for instance, like hadrosaurids or hadrosauroids, depending on the terminology you use, this is a group that almost certainly evolved in the Laurasian, the northern hemisphere land masses.
Yeah, they're very northern.
Yeah, sometime around the middle of the Cretaceous.
They've got down there.
Yeah,
right.
So what's super cool is that this is one of the few dinosaur groups that I think we could draw pretty firm biogeographic conclusions from. So biogeography is kind of the study of the distribution of animals and plants. And when we add the term paleo to that, so paleobiogeography, we get the study of the distribution of animals and plants in time and space as well. So they add the time component to that. I think that for non-avian dinosaurs, hadrosaurids are one of the few that we can draw really good, solid paleobiogeographic conclusions from based on, compared to other dinosaurs, a very robust fossil record, and generally speaking. So this group seems to have evolved in the northern hemisphere, probably around, 105 million years ago, something like that. What's really cool is they show up in Patagonia about 70 to 75 million years ago, despite the fact that there's a pretty good Patagonian early late Cretaceous dinosaur record. So basically we've got dinosaurs in Patagonia from, roughly 100 million years ago up to, say, 75, 70 million years ago. We have a pretty good record of dinosaurs. There's not a single shred of hadrosaur bone or tooth that's ever been found in any of those Patagonian dinosaur faunas. And then all of a sudden, they show up in faunas beginning around 70 to 75 million years ago, which to me suggests they're coming from someplace else. And the logical choice is the neighbor to the north, North America. How they
shed loads.
Where there are tons and tons of these things. They're super diverse in North America. And I think one other thing that's really telling is that the Patagonian hadrosauroids are usually reconstructed as what are called critosaurine hadrosaurids. And critosaurines are one of the southernmost North American hadrosaur groups. So if you would kind of guesstimate which group is going to get into South America, it might be this one. And so the pieces kind of add up really, really, really nicely together. Then you've got, at about 69 million years ago, the only evidence we have of Antarctic hadrosauroids. And so the I would say quite defensible biogeographic scenario you can build up in your head for this group, to explain these occurrences, is probably evolved in the Northern Hemisphere, made it to South America somehow. We're not sure how, but made it there somehow.
A cruise.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Then and now, North and South America were in pretty close geographic proximity. Now they would have been connected if not for the Panama Canal. But back in the Cretaceous, they were still not as close as they are today, but they were still close. And so it's conceivable that, over, let's say, once every 1,000 years or something, a hadrosaur population makes it to like one island a little bit further south. You know what I mean? And then over the course of 100,000 years, that's 100 times that's happened, or whatever. I mean, like,
no, I'm a catastrophic event person. I want it to be one massive event. So it happened once, and there's just two very randy hadrosaurs that just came across.
Oh, God.
No, I love that, actually. I mean, I think it's also the whole thing about biogeographic dispersals. This is something else you could get me talking about forever and ever and ever. Probably all three of us could, I think. But I think that given the immensity of geologic time, the improbable becomes the common.
Inevitable.
Like think about an event that happens once every 100,000 years. That's still, that event has happened 660 times since the end of the age of dinosaurs, And so all of a sudden these vastly improbable events become possible. And so I think that, I'm not going to necessarily invoke like some kind of, long-term dispersal or to get hadrosaurs to South America. But the point is, it seems to have happened. And then they from South America, presumably, they get to Antarctica as well. And that, as a result, like, that's why I would argue that if there is a relictual component to the Antarctic Cretaceous dinosaur fauna, it's colored by dispersal or interchange with other landmasses as well.
Yeah, you're still getting interchange, or at least invasion.
Exactly. Yep.
But going back to your previous point, though, it's also things move very differently to how people expect. Not only, giant events, but there was that paper, I want to say like 5-6 years ago now, where they had, it may not even be the paper, it was in the news, they had a tracker on an Arctic fox, and in one winter, it went from like Russia, but like on the Sweden-Norway side of Russia, and ended up deep in Canada.
Oh, wow.
It went like a couple of 1,000 miles in 6 months. And Arctic foxes are not massive.
No.
And so, when a little animal like that can just truck that kind of distance, it's genuinely not hard for even an entire population to move through a continent, not even in like a million years, or not even in a lifetime, in a year or two.
Yeah, the resistance to this is maybe getting into the weeds, but the resistance to kind of long distance dispersal in the paleontological literature is something I've never really understood. Like,
we can watch it happen.
Exactly. If we can watch it today,
observe. I mean, you don't even need to infer it. It's like we can just straight up see it.
Exactly. And I think, so I think the long and the short of it is animals, dispersal capabilities of animals are more than we give them credit for in general. And, again, add in the secret ingredient of the immensity of geologic time, and all of a sudden, these events that don't happen very often happen all the time. And, and so that's how I would probably explain hadrosaurs getting to South America and then getting to Antarctica. Probably wasn't like they're trucking there every year or something like that. But, but they got there is the point. We have the fossils to prove it.
3,500 kilometers, so 2,000 miles in 76 days.
I mean, that's just showing off.
Norway to Canada. For an animal with legs about the size of a corgi.
Yeah.
Well, but they are related to dogs, and we know that dogs love to walk. So that's what that is.
In 2.5 months, it's gone 2,000 miles, and that's something that small.
Yeah. And this is
a hadrosaur that's 7-8 meters long and has a 4-meter stride. What's 1,000 kilometers?
Yeah,
like nothing.
So talking of animals who love to migrate, should we get on to birds?
I was going to use Antarctic terns as my segue into that. You teed me up really nicely there, Izzy. So I can't remember. I think it's Antarctic terns, but some tern species goes pole to pole in its migration. I can't remember which one it is.
Oh yeah, within a couple of months. Maybe
it's
absolutely.
Yeah. But so talking about Antarctic Cretaceous birds, for the dinosaur paleontologists working in Antarctica, and I've already told you how, the record is fairly diverse, like in terms of the number of groups that are there, but it's also meager in terms of like, the individual specimens are definitely not the kind of thing that people are going to line up for blocks to see in a museum, anything like that. They're very, very incomplete a lot of the time. The birds are kind of a really nice consolation prize for me. We have found, our team and others have actually found quite nice bird material in the Antarctic Cretaceous. The two probably nicest specimens that have been found so far both come from a place called Sandwich Bluff on Vega Island, and they date to about 69 million years ago. They date to the base of the Sandwich Bluff member of the Lopez de Bergadano Formation. They both belong to, or at least they've both been referred to, a bird called Vegavis. And Vegavis is actually really, really cool. So it's represented by these two partial skeletons, both of which have lots and lots of bones preserved, many of them complete bones, so unlike their non-avian dinosaur counterparts in most cases. This is a bird that would be, I'd say maybe size of a small duck, something like that. It's been interpreted frequently. It's a little bit controversial, but it's been repeatedly interpreted as a member of the Anseriformes, so the duck goose group.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and so, and oftentimes, almost everybody would buy that it's what we call a crown bird. It's a member of a living bird group. So it's a member of the extant bird radiation, which goes by either the name Neornithes or Aves, depending on the terminology you use. But basically, this thing is a very close relative of modern birds, in particular, probably a really close relative of modern geese and ducks. that's living 69 million years ago in Antarctica. And I remember when I read about this, the first paper on Vegavus that gave it a name, at least, was published by my colleague Julia Clark, who is one of our members of our team, a very prominent member of our team. Julia, when she recovered this thing as a goose duck relative, I remember thinking, like, I'm never going to look at a mallard the same way again. You know what I mean? Like these things were, animals very similar to this were living in Antarctica at the time the ancestors of Tyrannosaurus Rex were stomping around Western North America. So that to me makes ducks seem a hell of a lot cooler than they did before. So I think I can say this because we've talked about this one at a couple of conferences too, but we have a skull of Vegavus now that we're in the process of publishing. My colleague Chris Torres talked about this in the 2022 meeting of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology in Toronto, so I don't think I'm spilling any beans here. So we, quite a while back during the 2011 season, we found, our geologist Eric Roberts found a concretion on Vega Island, on Sandwich Bluff, the same place that had yielded the two Vegavus skeletons that had broken open. And I'll tell the embarrassing story of when Eric brought it back to camp. All we could see in the concretion, all we could see in this rock about the size of an avocado was sort of a triangular feature. And Eric knew that we were there in part to try to discover more Vegavus, or more what we call crown birds, again, members of the extant bird radiation from the Cretaceous. Antarctica is one of the only places that have yielded these ever, during the age of dinosaurs. And so Eric knew what we were looking for. So he brings this rock back to camp. He's got this little kind of triangular thing in the rock that he can see. And he looks at us and he goes, "Hey guys, I just paid all your bills. I found you a bird skull. Look, here's the beak," and he's looking at this little triangular thing. And we're all like, "Yeah, Eric, whatever, man. Stick to the rocks. Go and measure some geologic section. Take some samples, make yourself useful." We had to eat our words in a really, really good way because the concretion ended up in my lab here at the Carnegie, and my fossil preparator Dan Pickering. I remember I handed it to him, and I'm like, "Dan, scratch around in here, see what you can find." And he starts in the area between, in the bill or in the beak, and he starts scratching down. And I remember I got a voicemail. He missed me on the call, and I listened to my voicemail, and he's like, "You got to get down here right now." And I'm like, basically hung up the phone, ran down there, and he found a pallet right where there should have been. Yeah. So Eric was right all along. This was indeed a bird skull, and it's actually turned out to be, by a pretty significant margin, the most complete bird skull that's ever been found from the Cretaceous of Antarctica. We believe it to belong to Vegavus, so for the first time we have a head for this bird. Previously there was only, I want to say, one palatal bone and the back end of a lower jaw or something, and we have both of those pieces so we can kind of compare to the other Vegavus specimens and match them up. Yeah, and our analysis continues to recover Vegavus as a member of the extant bird radiation, the crown bird group, and in particular related to ducks and geese as a member of this group Galleran series.
Did it have a beak, or has it got a jaw at this point? What's it look like?
It is toothless. It's toothless.
But is it rounded?
No,
it's
well. So this is, and again, I can't remember what we said in the SVP abstract, so I don't know what I'm allowed to say and whatnot. But it's so. The cool thing is there's another bird from Seymour Island from the same, almost the same age, maybe a little tiny bit geologically younger, that was described in 2002 as a fossil loon, given the incredibly original name Polarornis, polar bird. So what we think Polarornis is, because there is part of a skull with that, albeit not very much of one, what we think Polarornis is another member, is a close relative of Vegavus, basically, and that both of these birds, we think, are goose duck relatives that effectively are trying to be loons. So they have loon-like adaptations, but they're members of the duck group goose lineage. The closest thing I could think of would be if you've heard of a type of duck called a merganser. They're a type of sea duck. I was just about to say, is it a merganser? Yeah, they're a type of sea duck that has, in these cases, some of them have serrated bills, so it's almost like they have quasi-re-evolved teeth almost. This does not. This has a smooth bill, a loon-like bill. But yeah, the animal, in our mind at least, is a duck-like, phylogenetically speaking, evolutionarily speaking, is a duck or goose-like animal that's living a loon-like lifestyle.
If you went down the park and there's loads of we get Canada geese and all that sort of thing,
yeah,
barnacle geese and that. If you saw it, would you think that's a really strange Or would you just think it's another one?
I don't think it would look weird to you. I think that...
Amazing.
Yeah. So I've worked some on, and Dave knows this, actually, Dave and I have spent a fair bit of time in Beijing together. And that's actually, I think, where we got to know each other. And so we worked on a lot of birds called enantiornithines. This is this really cool group of birds from the age of dinosaurs, so Mesozoic birds, that seem to have been occupying a lot of the niches, the ecological niches that things like songbirds occupy today. So if you could take a time machine back to a Chinese forest 125 million years ago, a lot of the birds that you'd probably see perching in the trees would be these little guys called the enantiornithines. In my opinion, you would recognize them. If you got close enough, you would recognize them as something really, really unusual, because most enantiornithines still had teeth in their jaws, for one thing. No modern bird has teeth. Probably most of the audience knows that. No modern bird has teeth. Enantiornithines also probably were not great flyers. They also had quite well-developed claws on their forelimbs, which modern birds generally don't have.
You don't see robins sort of climbing up using their wings.
Not like baby Hawatson style or something like that. Yeah. And then the other funny thing about enantiornithines is they have really big butts.
Nice.
So they have a really well-developed pygostyle, so the sort of Parsons nose part of the bird, like the pygostyle is the fused tail vertebrae, the fused rod at the end of the tail to which the tail feathers anchor. And enantiornithines have a huge one, so they have slightly bigger butts than, proportionally speaking, than a sparrow or something like that.
We're living in the wrong period of time now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
If you like big butts, and you cannot lie, you definitely would have liked the Cretaceous. So my point with that whole diatribe is just to say that if you saw an enantiornithine in the flesh, if I had one holding, if I was holding one in my hand, and some of them were that small, I literally could do that if one was around, you would recognize it probably as a really, probably a somewhat unusual looking bird, especially if it opens its mouth, you would see the teeth and things like this. Vegavis, at least as we conceive Vegavis, it would not look unusual at all. Like I think you would kind of walk by it and be like, that's a weird looking loon.
I just love the fact that there was something that looks like a goose or a duck that was just there with things that should look like a bit like skinny hadrosaurs and things that should look like fluffy velociraptors. I mean,
if you want coolness, so I will set this up as carefully as I can, and hopefully this is a home run for Matt. You think about loons and you think about their famous ability to call, and you think about ducks and they go quack, and you just said this is the first skull of Vegavis, but it's not the most interesting cranial area.
Yes, I absolutely know where you're going, Dave. So the second specimen of Vegavis, it does not have much of the skull preserved, but it does have when Julia Clark, who described she described the holotypes of the name-bearing specimen of Vegavis in 2005, and then this second specimen of Vegavis in 2016, and then she's on the paper where we're describing the skull as well, so she's part of that team too. This second specimen, when they CT scan it, they notice something really bizarre inside the, in the block, and what it turned out to be, once they did the sort of CT segmentation, kind of took this object out of the rock digitally, is that it turned out to be the first preserved fossilized syrinx that had ever been found from the age of dinosaurs. The syrinx is the avian vocal organ. And so using that, Julia has, I guess, hypothesized that Vegavis had a voice box really similar to that of a modern bird, and therefore may have been able to make, kind of duck-like sounds or something like this. Yeah, I would have to ask her as to what kind of, what she thinks Vegavis sounded like. I actually don't know, but suffice it to say that it has, it had a voice box similar to that of a modern bird, which is really cool. And exactly also what we would expect, given what we think about its evolutionary placement.
Honk. I have one final question for you, because I know we've had you for ages, so thank you.
Oh, no, my pleasure. I'm having a good time, in case you can't tell.
It is a slightly silly question, but because of what you study and where you study it, are you secretly quite happy about climate change?
Oh.
Because the melting of those ice sheets.
Yeah.
I have brought this up before as like the one possible benefit is the Antarctic dinosaurs are really going to come out.
Yeah. So this is not the first time I've gotten this question. I will say it is 100% true that melting glaciers expose new rocks, and that exposes the potential for fossil discovery. And in fact, we've actually witnessed this ourselves in the 2016 season. I'm really crap at converting Fahrenheit to to Celsius, but you'll have to maybe do it for me in a voiceover or something. But we had days that were about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. For Antarctica, it's warm. It would be like something like, so 32 Fahrenheit is 0 C. So it would be like...
It's 15.
Yeah, I was going to say 15. About 15 is what I'm thinking. Yeah. To somebody who grew up in the snow belt of upstate New York, it's actually pretty balmy. And two, I think more to the point, I think if you're a penguin or a Weddell seal or a leopard seal or somebody else who lives there year round, it's probably pretty crazy hot, to the point where, when we were down there, we would see the glaciers on Vega Island. Literally, we could watch them melt. I mean, it was like a waterfalls coming off the mountains, as these glaciers were melting on these really hot days. Undoubtedly, if you look at satellite imagery of Vega Island, you can see glacial retreat over the past, decade and a half, 2 decades, something like that. It is 100% happening down there. It's exposing new rocks. That's, I guess, in a sense, good for us. But part of the reason we love working in Antarctica is we love the biota as well. Like we, on our website, if anybody wants to check that out, it's just antarcticdinos.org. One of our favorite parts of that is all the wildlife photos that we've taken over the years. We really are in love with the biota there, and it's as much as, sure, do I get excited when I see a new outcrop? I would be lying if I told you no. But at the same token, of course, that's like the significance of that is non-existent compared to what's happening down there. Like, it may be a tiny silver lining, but it's absolutely not what we want to see happen. And yeah, it's quite alarming to be at, for lack of a better word, kind of ground zero for climate change in the far southern hemisphere, watching these things happen around you and feeling, pretty helpless against it in a lot of ways. I'm 100% not in favor of it, but it is, again, it's a reality that it does expose new rocks, and it might expose new fossils in the process.
Okay, is it trying to end on a slightly more positive note rather than finishing with the death of the planet as directly observed by you?
We like extinction. Right. This is a dinosaur podcast.
Sure. Just a quick and obvious and easy one. Like, what's the best thing you found, or what's the favorite thing you found, or the thing you're most proud of?
Well, so
and Antarctica or anywhere.
Oh, okay. I'll start with Antarctica. We have a couple of discoveries that I can't talk about yet, but suffice it to say that they will be, when they come out, they will be my favorites. And this is just because you don't want to spill the beans before official publication, that kind of stuff. I totally get it. Yeah, I always hate being coy with audiences, but it's just the way the journals work, so you kind of got to do it that way.
It's playing hard to get.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That was always me in high school. Totally hard to get. So for Antarctica, it's a couple of discoveries I can't talk about yet. I would say career-wise, I'd have 2, and I'll try to keep them short. But I would say probably the reason I have the job, just to bring the discussion full circle, the reason I have the job here at the Carnegie was that when I was in grad school, me and a few other grad students and my grad advisor, Peter Dodson, launched this project with some Egyptian colleagues to go back to a place called the Bahariya Oasis in Egypt. And this is a place that's famous for yielding, among other things, the original specimen of Spinosaurus, this famous sailback dinosaur that was the type specimen of which was destroyed in World War II during a bombing of Munich. And when I was in grad school, by that point, nobody had ever gone back to the Bahariya Oasis and found new dinosaurs, dinosaurs that hadn't been blown up in World War II. So we launched this project where we wanted to go back and try to find more. We didn't, unfortunately, find very much of Spinosaurus itself, but we did find what turned out to be one of the largest dinosaurs that had ever been discovered, a dinosaur called Paralititan, a type of titanosaur. So that was, we published that in Science. Technically my first peer-reviewed paper is a second authored paper in Science. So it was all downhill from there. It just was this remarkable miracle discovery that I think sort of put me on the map from an intellectual standpoint, and I think ultimately was really the biggest reason I got the job at the Carnegie a couple of years later. So that was I don't want to take too much time, but basically we didn't know what we had. I was working at a different site. My colleagues Josh and Jason were digging up what we thought were 2 bones of this small sauropod that we had found. They radioed me and they're like, "You got to get over here." And I'm like, "Okay." And I go over there. It took me 5 minutes to drive over there or something. And what had happened was the 2 individual bones, they'd cleared off the rock in between them, and it turned out to be the inner part and the outer part of one single gigantic humerus bone, an upper arm bone. of this dinosaur that we ultimately named Paralitite. And I remember when we found it, we had just dug up a sauropod in Wyoming 6 months before, and that had a humerus as well. The part we could see of this, it was less than a third of it exposed. It was already longer than this other 50-footer. So we just were like, this is, I mean, we knew right then and there it was one of the biggest dinosaurs that had ever been discovered. It was just crazy, 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 crazy good luck. And then my other one is a similar story of good luck. It was my first year here at the Carnegie, and this is ultimately how I met Dave. So another cool kind of connection here. My first year at the Carnegie, me and my friend Jerry Harris joined a colleague, Hailu Yu, at the Institute of Vertebrate Paleontology and Paleoanthropology in Beijing, where Dave used to work, to go out to this place called the Changma Basin in northwestern China, in Gansu province in China. And we were funded by the Discovery Channel. We had like a lot of kind of expectations riding on us. The reason we went out there was that the type specimen of a fossil bird called Gansus humanensis was found from this place in 1981, and it's just a single foot of a couple inches tall of this bird. Hailu's team had gone there in 2002, found a wing of one of these weirdo little things called the Nantyornithians, so the second bird from this locality, from this rock formation. We went there in 2004. We weren't finding anything for a long, long time, until Hailu pulls up next to me, and I'm working in a quarry, kind of frustrated, whatever. Hailu pulls up next to me in the Jeep, and he just goes, "Would you like to see the bird?" And I'm like, what? And so I run up this hill on the other side of the road, and we had hit like this layer, basically, of fossil birds. And now there are well over 100 partial to nearly complete birds from this, from this single locality, these two single quarries in the Changma Basin. We published another science paper, also second authored. I'm never like the belle of the ball. I'm always like second fiddle. That's okay. It's like, I have no complaints, but yeah, we published another science paper on this in 2006. Hailu's the first author, I'm second, where we referred a bunch of these birds to this original, new specimens to this original bird, Gansus humanensis. It's still to this day one of the most quote unquote advanced or derived birds from the early Cretaceous that's been found. So one of the closest things to something like a goose or a duck that would have been living around 120 million years ago. Those two, the discovery of Paralitite in 2000 and the discovery of our Gansus quarry in 2004 are my two favorites of all time.
Thank you so much for coming on, Matt.
Thank you guys for having me, and this has been a real lot of fun. So if you ever want another conversation, I'd totally be game.
Excellent. Well, when all of your discoveries that you're not allowed to talk about, when you are allowed to talk about, we're here.
Okay, that sounds good. It's a deal.
Thank you so much for that interview. That was amazing, wasn't it, Dave? I mean, I am very excited. I'm gutted that I had to cut out loads of stuff in that because we're not allowed to tell all the things yet.
Yes, he very much said some things that we're not allowed to share.
But we'll have him back when we are. We will.
Which is nice. I mean, it's one of those things. So stuff comes out in the literature and then in the media when it's something really, really exciting. And one of two things is, A, I heard about that about 8 years ago and I've been waiting for them to get off their bum and do it, or B, I had absolutely no idea about this because they've kept it so close to the chest that only a handful of people knew, and people are in general very good about keeping a secret if it needs to be kept secret. So yeah, I alternate between being utterly bemused by the excitement about something which everyone's known for years and years and years, and oh my god, that's genuinely exciting, and this is more of the latter, so that's very cool. And then we're not going to tell you who's listening.
Yeah. I really hope. I did go through it with a fine-tooth comb, but if this episode suddenly disappears, save it, because I've made a massive boo-boo. But no, we haven't. No, we haven't. We're good, she says confidently. Anyway, we have not a secret at all, but in case this is our last chance to warn you that we're doing a live show.
I think it is,
in Oxford on the 25th of May, which is a Saturday. I think it's at 3 p.m. or something like that, or it ends at 3 p.m.
Yeah.
I can't remember, but it's there. If you go to our Patreon page, there is a link. If you look down the bottom of the notes for this episode, there is a link. It's at the old fire station. If you just want to Google old fire station and terrible lizards, you will find us, and there you'll be able to ask us live questions. You'll be able to see what we look like in real life, and you'll be pleased to know that we are massive.
I was going to say, you're putting them off. Stick to the questions bit rather than you literally see us in real life.
But you'll be able to put questions to us, and we've got a sort of little pile of questions that we'll do in case you guys guys get really shy for no reason, or also get, Dave tells you off for not listening to specific episodes that he's previously referenced, which is, it's always good to ask Dave an obvious question just to make him angry.
Right.
But yeah.
Anyway, thank you to Matt.
Yeah, thank you so much to Matt. That was great. And also, do check out for the links at the bottom for his stuff. And I don't know what noises do penguins make, because the only one I know is pingu.
We can do a noir.
Well, you do a noir, and I will do a goose honking, because the fact that there were geese back in those days looking for breadcrumbs.
And seriformes, maybe. Yeah, anyway.
They were geese. I know there was a goose that they found in Mongolia, but that had like big claws and stuff, and teeth.
You think Therizinosaurus?
No, I'm not thinking Therizinosaurus. There was another Mongolian one which looked a lot like a goose in all of the pictures from it, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, You're thinking of, no, its name's dropped out, my Hauscaraptor.
I'm always thinking of Hauscaraptor.
Hauscaraptor,
when I'm bored in the shops, Hauscaraptor, just there.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Anyway, this outro is now longer than the interview that you had to cut down.
It's fine. People like it informal like this, don't you guys? Shut up. All right then, after 3, hopefully see you at the Film Fire Station in May. 3, 2, 1.
No. That's a foghorn.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Terrible Lizards. You are amazing. If you're a patron, you're double amazing. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/Terrible Lizards, or just go to terriblelizards.co.uk and follow the links. If a bunch of extra content and having your questions answered doesn't appeal, you can always support the show by leaving us a review. Please do share it with your friends. It does make a massive difference. And if you want to support either Dave or myself individually, please go to our respective websites, davehone.co.uk or iszi.com. You can get our books. Mine have got nothing to do with dinosaurs. But anyway, squawky bye-bye.